Welcome everybody to this MENASP webinar. I would just like to, as a point of housekeeping up front, if everybody would be kind enough to have themselves on mute while the host and the speaker are presenting. Thank you very much, and over to you, Walid.
Hello everyone, my name is Walid. I'm happy to be the host of the MENA Social Policy Network webinar today. So the MENA Social Policy Network webinar series is mostly virtual webinar as platform for speakers from within and outside the network to present their research. The MENA Social Policy Network webinar series aims to enable network members and wide audiences to access research on social policy conflict prevention. The focus of the research East and North Africa region, but we welcome lessons from other countries and the region that can help inform social policy and conflict prevention research and policy development in the MENA region. So today we will host Dr. Hanaa Almoaibed, who is Visitor Research Fellow at LSE Middle East Center. She works on education, work, youth, sustainability, and gender in the GCC and in the MENA region. Her main area of interest are related to young people's transition within their education careers, from education to work, and within the labor market. She explores various social factors that influence this transition experience, including gender, socioeconomic status, and social background. Today, Dr. Hanaa will be talking about social protection in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Hanaa for 30-minute presentation. Dr. Hanaa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Walid. So thank you so much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Walid mentioned, I primarily focus my research looking at education and young people, but so much of kind of the young people's experience within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is related to labor market transitions. And because of the huge kind of active labor market policy shift within the social protection space, it's an area that I've been looking at a little bit more closely. So this was initially part of a different research project, but there's quite a few learnings kind of that integrate with my previous work that I'd like to present more today. So I'm kind of going to give an overview of the protection landscape, a little bit on the role of the different, actually, kind of three main areas, some on private sector involvement as well, the role of non-governmental organizations in the charity sector, as well as kind of key future opportunities within the social protection space. So, I mean, in Saudi Arabia, social protection has long been embedded into the fabric of the kind of the social relationship between citizens and the government, and it's kind of the government's provided lots of subsidies and support to the wider population, kind of in line with the Islamic foundations of the kingdom. And while the government frequently discloses kind of, you know, new contributions to different social programs, it's not readily kind of transparent in terms of how many people within the kingdom actually need support, but it does talk about support quite a bit, and talks about people who are have limited spending capabilities or limited income, and therefore you know that there is a segment within the population that is a recipient of this, and the programs themselves in the Dhaman, or the social assistance program, is very big. So today, over 90 different social protection programs are managed by 21 different entities within the kingdom. And there's been a reform process in terms of how this is done after Vision 2030, which was released in 2016 for various kind of reasons, diversification of the economy, to combat unemployment, and to move away from oil specifically. So there's kind of three main baskets, if you will: labor market, so kind of active labor market policies, social insurance, and then social assistance and care. So I'm going to talk about all three of those a little bit. But I think that what's, kind of interesting is that within kind of the National Transformation Program that launched alongside the Vision 2030, there's been several kind of key performance indicators or KPIs that were set to really address different segments of society. And those are kind of how we can look at whether or not some of these policies are working or not. So there's more accountability built into the system than there ever had been in the past. So this is primarily drawing on desk research, but I'll briefly discuss kind of the history of social spending in the kingdom, a map of the organizations, and I'll draw on some findings from some focus groups with women beneficiaries of a charity within the kingdom. So there's an overall population of a little bit over 34 million within the kingdom, and it's acknowledged that a segment of the population is in need and eligible for social welfare or social assistance or laman ijtimai. So social assistance is really what it's kind of translated as. But as I mentioned, there is no formal kind of publication of who these specific recipients are, and the statistics are not necessarily all available in one place. Despite kind of the General Authority on Statistics being readily available, you can kind of decipher things, but it's not published as these are the poverty numbers, this is the poverty line. Instead, you'll talk about kind of each program and its beneficiaries and kind of who's benefiting from what. But it's been allocated through formal government channels in addition to the charity sector since the 1960s. It was formalized, but then basically there's been an evolution of what this has looked like within the kingdom. I think it's interesting because there's this idea that zakat is going to provide the social protection within the kingdom, but how that's used is often not necessarily understood. So generally, as a Muslim country, the government formalizes zakat collection. So corporations contribute 2.5% of their annual income, and this has always been the case. And that basically is transferred to the Zakat and Tax Customs Authority, which partially funds the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development's Social Security, or the LAMAN, the Social Assistance Program. And that is the entity that's been responsible in its different forms as it's evolved for distributing social assistance throughout the history of the kingdom's kind of social protection formalization. And those deemed in need are marginalized citizens. So, I mean, the categories are explicit that you can easily find. So you have basically people who are unable to work for different reasons, such as disability or elderly, unsupported families, widows, orphans, divorced women, carers, family of prisoners, abandoned families, and the families of drug addicts. So these are explicitly laid out in terms of those are the beneficiaries, as well as people who cannot necessarily access work for unknown reasons. So that's kind of a loose category that's there. That's traditionally the way it's been distributed. However, there's been a reform, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But since the 1960s, those were the key categories that were included under the social protection kind of umbrella. If you want to look at kind of contemporary history and how it's evolved, in 2005, the late King Abdullah launched a national poverty reduction strategy and supplementary support programs that transferred monthly payments to poor families. It kind of doubled the amount of money that was being transferred. And then kind of between 2009 and 2014, there was a second stage which broadened the array of support to kind of address housing challenges and other income and unemployment, as well as social security. But under the vision, basically, there's been quite a bit of change in the way social protection has been defined as well as approached. So a lot of this has to do with demographic shifts, population growth, and also in addition to kind of shifts in let's say the kind of oil prices in terms of spending capabilities. So lots of things have happened. There's been a bit of an ebb and flow in terms of what kind of assistance people have been getting. There's been consistent Laman, but other programs have come in. And I think that the major change has been a focus on active labor market policies more than anything else, because there's been this reliance on social protection since the 1960s. It was almost considered the kind of fallback that most people will rely on, in addition to the large proportion of the population that is working in the public sector. So a lot of the expectations of citizens was that you're going to get social protection payments, or you're going to work for the government, and that is essentially another way of getting that kind of protection. And the shift away from that is really what's kind of, the main change that's happened with the vision. So I think the first step that was undertaken after the release of the vision was seen in spending cuts, actually, that were directed toward the goal of achieving a fiscal balance within the kingdom. In September 2016, the government announced the pay cuts for public sector employees, but then it was in 2017, it was kind of reinstated, the kind of salary levels went back, and bonuses were given to a lot of the civil servants and military personnel who initially saw some spending, some cuts in their pay. But the aim kind of was to transfer savings to the poorer segments of society. So it was believed that really actually more people were relying on social protection than need be, and therefore we need to figure out how we can do this better. I think what happened was people were a little bit shocked by this. And so there's been, amongst the population, discomfort with the changes, especially people that were reliant on this. But it's not because they necessarily needed it. It was because this was something that they were overly reliant on for several years. And so the shifts are probably necessary, but were not necessarily received initially very positively. So thinking about labor protection and these active labor market policies, there are so many different programs that are in place. But it's probably one of the most ambitious objectives of 2030 is that labor market reform. So the International Monetary Foundation estimates that over 1.4 million Saudis are going to enter the job market by 2023. And to address this level of demand, the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development has bolstered its localization, job training, education programs, and also the encouragement of women's employment. And they do this through programs such as Hafiz, which is the social kind of unemployment program, Masar, Jadara, Timkeen, I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But there's a plethora of labor market programs that are supposed to encourage people to work rather than rely on to work, and especially to work in the private sector, rather than to rely heavily on public sector employment, which is becoming less available to many people. And it seems that so much of this is actually working on some level. So unemployment rates have been falling consistently for several years. Right now, it's a little over 9% overall. This can be really high when you look at women or young people, but it still is falling on at an overall rate. Unemployment labor market participation has been increasing. You also see that there was a rise in hiring of Saudis across all sectors. So these nationalization programs are also encouraging more Saudis to enter the labor market. And so according to the 2021 National Transformation Program annual report, the percentage of individuals who are able to find sustainable employment and no longer require social services and social assistance was 28.2%. So there's an increase of people that are leaving kind of that camp of depending on certain policies and able to go into the labor market. And I think, the key employment programs, Hafiz, which was launched actually in 2011, so before the vision, it's the kingdom's job replacement program. It pays job seekers who meet certain criteria monthly stipend for up to a year to remain actively engaged or seeking employment or skills retraining. You have other programs that encourage Saudization, like Nitaqat, which in turn actually sets a minimum wage, because in order for a company to register a Saudi employee into Nitaqat, they have to pay them a minimum wage of 4,000 riyals, which is about $1,064. And then other programs facilitate training skilling and job replacement. So anybody that's a beneficiary of the social assistance programs, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next slide, has to register for Temkeen, which is one of the programs here, which is one of the active labor market policy programs. So those on social assistance who are able to work are required to register, and I think almost 250,000 beneficiaries have registered for Temkeen since 2017. And since then, almost 200,000 of them were successfully activated. 160,000 found employment, while 35,000 started businesses. So there's several efforts in this space to really get people active in the labor market, and the outcomes seem to be going in the right direction. In terms of social assistance and care, or Dhaman, as it's called in Arabic, there's basically, these are kind of the main programs that are associated with social assistance and care. There's more, but thinking about it is, you have Zakah, which funds Dhaman, but then you also have a program which is a citizens account. You have all the other programs that have existed. So, education programs from primary, secondary, and tertiary programs. You have ISKAN, which is housing assistance. You have the Social Development Bank, which gives interest-free loans, as well as other support to families that qualify because of their income levels. Mua'ama, which is a program that is specifically targeting people with disabilities, and then Takam, which is another program which is making sure that people have access to these kind of different labor market policies and labor market programs, sorry. So kind of the citizens account was very interesting because following energy fluctuation and prices, they introduced 5% VAT, and then that went to 15% very quickly. So the primary complaint, I think, amongst most Saudis is that they are struggling to meet high cost of living without these subsidies, even when they are employed. And so I think that, that there's probably overspending and therefore an accumulation of debt amongst certain segments of society. And the citizens account was supposed to basically be cash transfers into everybody's account that in order to bridge the gap between whatever social assistance you were getting that wasn't meeting your spending needs, or it was supporting those who basically were in need of it, even if they weren't on Dhaman. So the cash transfers were gone. Basically, you do the application online, you don't ever really meet anybody, and then the cash transfers are calculated and given to each person into their accounts. So there's been it was paused for a while. No new beneficiaries were able to apply for it, but then it's been reinstated. So again, it's still seen to be something that people do need. They do need some of those cash transfers, and this is set up again as a government program. But the monthly payments vary depending on spending levels on energy products, food, energy and food specifically. The Social Security program, again, is financed by Zakah, as I mentioned in the past. And then Zakah is calculated according to Al-Wa'a al-Zakawi. So it's kind of like a pool that's calculated, and that there can be discrepancies in terms of how that's calculated. So it's quite complex in terms of how much each corporation is going to be contributing, but it doesn't always meet the need. And so you do often find that the government will kind of bridge the gap between what corporations are contributing to this, to the Zakah pool and giving in terms of social benefits, and then what is kind of how the government is going to calculate other spending to bridge the gap. The new Social Security program has changed in terms of being very much more targeted. So instead of those categories getting these blanket payments, you're trying to make sure that, again, the most in need are being targeted. It addressed certain inclusion and exclusion errors. So basically, the revised Social Security and Social Assistance Law targeted now targets the bottom 20% of the kingdom's population. This was announced in 2019 after receiving approval from the Council of Ministers, and then it was launched in 2020. So reforms shifted from universality toward a very much more targeted approach and moved from supporting individuals to supporting households. So the current system is focused on basically preventing kind of previous double dipping that might have happened. And that's something that they've announced as a very kind of important part of the program in order to make sure that the most in need are the ones that are getting the protection and the assistance. So the new law sought to redress several inclusion and exclusion errors, such as basically those who were able to work now need to be registered in an active labor market policy program. It used to be that if you were able-bodied, you were ineligible. An able-bodied man, you were ineligible for social protection, regardless of whether or not you could be employed. And anyone who was employed then wouldn't get any more benefits. However, this has been revised. So even if you are receiving social assistance, you can still work, and that won't go away instantly. It will be calculated based on, can you still continue to get a share based on what your income is with your salary. In the new law, a household is defined for the first time as well in the kingdom's history. So it was defined as people who share a meal together, and a minimum income of less than 1,100 riyals per person rather than per household was established as a baseline for support. The categories of beneficiaries of regular social security payments were revised to include many of the same ones. However, again, as mentioned, it then kind of made sure that even if you basically it was revised so that if you were working, you would still get some assistance. It also developed a hybrid means test to guarantee minimum income to ensure that those who are working but still need additional support are not penalized for entering the formal labor market. And the new calculation increased the eligibility for social security payments, but also increased incentives to encourage work. So if the family has employment income, only 50% of this is considered in the calculation of total support to maximize the amount each family is eligible for. And then finally, social insurance. So prior to 2020, Public Pension Agency was responsible for government employees, and then the GCC, which is a general organization for social insurance for private employees, but then those were merged. So you have a bigger basically fund, and that's invested, and then those kind of proceeds provide the pension fund for those who retire or employees who also the families of employees who maybe would die on the job or were disabled, etc. So anyone registered in these pension schemes is paid a retirement salary monthly after they're eligible for that. It's basically withholding 11% of the salaries of Saudi citizens, and then eventually upon retirement, and the retirement age was also increased in order to make sure that people were working for longer. So I think that the main takeaway from these changes within the policies is that there's just a big push toward ensuring that those who are most in need are getting the bigger kind of portion of the social assistance, and those who can work, that should be the primary kind of means that they get their income from. In terms of non-governmental organizations, so I think one of the things that was really interesting was that one of the things that's interesting that we've learned recently is that non-governmental organizations still give out cash transfers to some of their beneficiaries, but these cash transfers are usually helping them kind of pay off debts more than they're actually helping them meet their spending needs. And there's a lot you can just kind of infer from that. But what they would really like to do, and what most of the charities and the non-governmental organizations that I've spoken to have talked about, is really provide more programs to help with more qualitative programs rather than actual cash transfers. So prior to kind of the vision, there was also, it was very difficult to start a new non-governmental organization. It was very difficult to start a charity organization. That's changed quite a bit. And there's been actually a big push to activate the nonprofit sector. So the sector has grown 166% between 2017 and 2019. And in 2021, it was reported to contribute $2.1 billion to the kingdom's GDP. So there's this idea that the nonprofit sector and the charity sector should be contributing quite a bit to overall kind of GDP. And the vision's goal is to make 5% of the GDP, is to make the nonprofit sector contribute 5% of GDP due to its role in job creation, social development, and volunteering prospects. It mostly employs Saudis, so 78% of people who work in that sector are Saudis, and it supplies 50,000 jobs, or it did supply 50,000 jobs in 2020. So there's room for the charity sector to grow, and this is one of the reasons why it's really being encouraged to grow in that way. There's 1,335 different charities and nonprofit entities registered with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development, and they offered social services in different areas such as education, housing, and other services in health, culture, entertainment, civilian rights, environment, and various other charity activities, according to a report on the nonprofit sector. But all nonprofit organizations are registered with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development. So there is an awareness of what's happening in terms of kind of charity activities, and there's collaboration between the two on some level in terms of where there are gaps. And then you also have other kind of ways that charity is given through awqaf, which are endowments. So this is a very kind of well-established way that charity has often been distributed in the past. And then you also have a National Center for Nonprofit, which was established in 2018, again, to coordinate between the different entities and hopefully help make sure that there are programs that are targeting the different segments of society that are not necessarily getting the support that they need from some of the ministry programs. I'm almost done. I know I'm running a little bit over, but in terms of charity, I think it's really important just to note that women's charity organizations have been long established. So with the Laman, or the social assistance programs that were launched in the 1960s, so were so many of these women's charity organizations. So you have Al-Ula, which is the first charity organization that was ever registered with the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. That's what it was called in the past, in 1962, right when the social assistance program was launched. And you also have other organizations such as Nahda, Jood, as well as Dammam charity organization. There's so many, most of them are led by women, and therefore most of them are targeting women beneficiaries as well. I think there's some really interesting studies that come out of the research arms of these charity organizations. So Nahda, for instance, found that they did quite a bit of research during COVID-19 on the needs of their beneficiaries specifically, but they also then look at kind of trends within the kingdom, and they did find that up to 40% of women lost employment or income during COVID. And then that was something that was really used to figure out how they could better target the different segments of society that were affected most by COVID. They also found that women were 4 times more likely to lose their income in times of crisis. So I think what's important to note is that even if the social protection programs are trying to find the inclusion and exclusion errors and really target more carefully, sometimes it's important to also rely on some of these organizations that are very close to the beneficiaries. And I think that that's one of the key opportunities with the nonprofit sector, really, is that they're very close to the beneficiaries. They understand what the needs are and where the challenges are. So I think in terms of kind of key opportunities with these changes that are happening with social protections, the current system is massive. Government programs are generous and available to a huge part of the society. However, there is a desire to move towards self-sufficiency, which means that a clearer baseline is necessary for targeting. I do think that the fact that you can't find the data very readily available is still a very big challenge when you're trying to design these programs or trying to assist in the implementation of some of them. I think there needs to be more programs that target young people and skill development from an early age, because I do think that considering the history of social protection within the kingdom, it was kind of a sudden change for so many people, and you might not have been set up for this kind of these expectations. And so there's been a little bit of a shock to the system. So starting quite early, again, with education is very key. I do think that you have a lot of specialized research that can happen through the nonprofit sector. And you have some of the organizations such as the Nahda, but also King Khalid Foundation that do incredible research that can very much benefit and inform policymakers to target more effectively. And I think that the efforts of the nonprofit sector should be on capacity building for social workers, capacity building for policymakers as well, in terms of identifying what the key challenges are within society. I think a lot of the social protection programs have been established in collaboration with many of these organizations because they are aware of this, but I do think that there's also an opportunity to work with them even more. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanaa, for this nice presentation. So without further ado, I will open the floor for the Q&A session. The attendees can ask their question through the chat or simply raising their hands. So please feel free to intervene.
Yeah, I have
Any
a question.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Hanaa. I just want to ask if you checked the work that has been done by the World Bank. They supported the government of Saudi Arabia in developing a social protection strategy. They did all the baseline work, the assessment, and this is a recent work, so I don't know to what extent you have used the information in their work.
Thank you. No, I am aware of it, and we have looked at it actually as well. I think that specifically in looking at some of the active labor market policies, those were a lot of them were developed alongside the World Bank, but also in the new Laman program was also done through a collaboration with them as well. So the focus on targeting rather than universal giving, and then fixing kind of those inclusion exclusion errors was something that was done in collaboration for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I see Adil, he raised his hand. Adil, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much, Walid. Good to see friends. Hi, Hanaa. Sorry, I'm actually in Riyadh, so marhaba. Thanks for the presentation. I apologize if I didn't hear everything. But I wanted to ask if you could maybe just say a little bit about those forgotten people, the non-nationals, in terms of that 30-odd%, and where they fit in and what's being done for those, especially those that are born here, and what people call in the GCC permanently in a state of impermanence. And if you could just say anything on the role of pensions in the social protection ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Adil. Nice to hear your voice as well. So I think that that's a really big question, obviously, in terms of non-Saudis and where they fall into the social protection question within the kingdom. So if you look at some of the work that's actually recently been done with the World Bank, that's specifically looking at reforming the kafala system, especially for people that are working in corporations, and providing more mobility. So instead of being glued to your employer, you have the opportunity to move from one company to another, which was something that wasn't necessarily available in the past. And I want to say, yes, a lot of the people are born in Saudi Arabia and then they wouldn't be eligible for citizenship, but most people are then eligible for employment under the kind of system that's set up as of now. I also want to say that as much as it might not be published or discussed, or you can't really find the data reliably, most of these programs are available to non-Saudis as well. And so the registration approach is opaque for a lot of people. And I think that that's where the nonprofit sector comes in, and it supports people in navigating the system, because they will be able to access the benefits on many levels. It just isn't done as explicitly. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, 100%. So I know that that was the first question. And then the second was on pensions. So again, I think I mentioned in the end on GOSI, which is a social, kind of pension program that's available. The fund that is there basically provides payments after retirement for anybody that was registered under GOSI. And then it also does provide payments for anybody that was registered as a government employee. So that's, I'm not sure what else, what the question is, or kind of if there's more that you wanted me to say on that. But the reform was done recently to make it a bigger fund. So hopefully the return on the investment is bigger, and that the sustainability of the pension fund lasts longer and more, and basically everybody that is registered is guaranteed to get payments upon retirement.
Thank you. We have Abdelhadi and then Marcus.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to Dr. Hanaa for this presentation. My question is, Dr. Hanaa, please, if there are some limits of this program of social protection in Saudi Arabia. This is the first question. And the second question, please, I want to know the role of the private sector in this social program protection in Saudi Arabia, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely limits. And I think one of the key limits, in my opinion, is the fact that the data isn't necessarily readily available. And so the government has the data. So they're working on developing these programs, but to make it a more collaborative process, I think that the data would be nice to be able to find it, through official channels as well, to really understand what's happening. And so I think that that's, in general, that's one of the limits. I think the other limit might have to do with collaboration between different government entities. So you do have a lot of duplication of efforts on some level. As one example, some of the active labor market policies are enacted by multiple entities. So yeah, maybe that's casting a wider net and catching more people. But at the same time, I think that that means that you might not be targeting as effectively as you could by making sure that you have kind of more streamlined policies. Other limitations still have to do with some of the social norms within the kingdom. So even if you have active labor market policies that are encouraging people to go out and work, you still have a lot of kind of gendered roles, gendered expectations that probably put limits to whether or not people can benefit from these policies or not. You also have, and some of those gendered roles are not just putting constraints on women, but also on men. So if you do have this expectation to be primary breadwinner, you might not be able to necessarily take time to upskill as much as you would like to in order to, provide for your family, because you're getting a better education and therefore a better job. You might have to be working more quickly. You might have to be entering the labor market more quickly, and therefore ending up relying on perhaps more, unreliable jobs. The words escape me, but yes. So there, as well as then for women, it might be harder for them to enter the labor market. So I think there's still a lot of social norms that might make it difficult for some of these policies to really work. I think another key limitation really has to do with the fact that cost of living is getting high, and there's going to be time needed for the economy to adjust and really incorporate so many of the people into the labor market. At the moment, I think there's still constraints on that. Even if it's growing and it's going in the right direction, there's still kind of a mismatch. And then one of the other challenges is when the Adil mentioned is making sure that we're doing the work for everybody inside the kingdom as well. In terms of the role of the private sector, I think the main role of the private sector is to, again, provide employment, and therefore the, kind of employment means that you are then registered for social insurance, which means that you will have a pension, supposedly. Another thing that the private sector is doing is through their social responsibility programs. So there's a lot of pressure for them to be contributing to social responsibility programs, and therefore, contributing not only programs, but also monetary contributions to different government programs that are providing kind of a wider cash transfers or other programs to different segments of society.
Thank you, Dr. Hanaa. Marcus?
Thank you very much, Hanaa, for this very, very interesting presentation. It's good to know more about a country where there's very little research on it. I have 3 questions. Please excuse if you have answered them already and I just missed it. The first would be on your sources. Did you have to travel to Saudi Arabia? Did you talk to a lot of stakeholders in Saudi Arabia, or did you get all the information from your home place? The second one is, can you say something on the volume of the social protection system? I mean, I heard rumors from the old system that it consumed huge amounts of several 5-6% of GDP, but it was all just estimates. Can you say something on the costs? Yeah. And the third question, finally. Have you published your results? Are you planning to publish them? Because I think this is really so important to have it documented. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So the sources, so this was initially part of a program or a project that has taken kind of a different turn. So I haven't published the findings. I might, potentially through maybe even kind of pivoting and doing some additional research. In terms of sources, yes, a lot of it was done in the kingdom. In terms of some of the research that's done, a lot of it was is research that is available, and it's kind of we can put that together and make that more readily available as well. But also through my engagement with different entities within the kingdom. So I do a lot of research with government entities, specifically looking at labor policies. And so some of these are, conversations that have happened, attending different events that happen through chambers of commerce within the kingdom, through some of the, different research networks that are within the kingdom, where people are presenting more on the types of programs that are happening. So there's a lot of showcasing of what is going on, and you can kind of then maybe apply a slightly critical lens to that and really ask questions about what's not going on as well. But you can really access a lot of this information. It is out there and readily available. In terms of the volume, again, this isn't published, so I don't really know. But yes, I can tell you that most likely there's a significant amount of money that is spent on it. But one of the reasons for that isn't necessarily only because people are in financial need, but it's because these programs are set up to provide basically services for everybody. So some of them have shifted to be very much more targeted, like housing, for instance, or even Laman is more targeted now. However, other programs are very big programs that support the entire population, like the education program, where all students in university even get paid a stipend. People in vocational training get paid a stipend in order to attend education. So this is, an area where there's a lot of spending that's happening. So if you think about social support, it's massive because support is in healthcare, it's in education, and then it's on all these other targeted programs as well.
We have question in the chat from Amal Watfa Karaki. Amal, would you like to open your mic and ask the question, or? Okay, the question says that, is there a role for local councils within this social network?
No, I think that's a really interesting question. So I also think that it's probably not widely known how local councils participate in the kingdom as a whole. So you do have these local councils with very large networks of people that come together, youth programs and youth councils are part of this network as well. And so what happens basically is that you have almost somebody that always has their finger on the pulse in the different regions of the kingdom. And what this does is actually give insight into where kind of the needs are. So there was a program that I worked on last year, which was looking at the role of local councils in understanding what local stakeholder needs were in tourism expansion. So understanding specifically what kind of economic activities were there, but also what kinds of changes would happen as a result of tourism expansion and how you could make sure that the kind of locals' voices were incorporated into the change planning. And so you do have a role that's there, and people within these local councils are often appointed, but oftentimes also partially appointed, partially almost elected into these positions. But they usually are people who are quite connected in the different regions, and so are very much part of a local community and really understand the needs. And so I think that there's, again, when you think about things like the charity organizations and the nonprofits, a lot of the people that are sitting on these councils are also part of those organizations and then are very close to the beneficiaries and very close to the needs of the local societies.
Thank you, Dr. Hanaa.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm just checking how I speak because Marlies and I are in the same office, but I hope it's not creating too much echo. Is that okay? Yeah. Can you all hear me still? Okay. Yeah. Thanks again. Thank you, Hanaa, and thanks to everyone for joining. I just wanted to ask you, Hanaa, just a bit more about the employment aspect and the reduction of the dependencies on the government welfare benefits in Saudi Arabia. Just if you could give a bit more sort of more of your insights in terms of how effectively these are happening. So just in terms of the connections with employment creation and opportunities, do you have a sense of the potential of these to work well and what these opportunities might be? And related to this, the way in which the citizens are responding to sort of the long-term, I mean, I don't want to say reliance, but they've been privileged to benefit from the government support, and just how, this transition, how effectively it might be happening. So maybe sort of slightly speculative, but just would welcome your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Just to take that second question first, I think that, it's an incredibly young population. And I think that because of that, a lot of these young people who are entering the labor market for the first time have not relied on these social benefits and therefore are not expecting that and are quite aware of the pressure that they are under in order to find work. And I think that that's, again, it's an opportunity that has been recognized, I think, by policymakers, and I think that young people are aware that this is an expectation. They are actively looking for employment, which is again a reflection in terms of labor market participation increasing both for young men and young women, and having more young women in the labor market means that you have, I think, a different understanding of work amongst young people, which was not necessarily the way it was in the previous generations. So I think that there's, maybe that is speculative, but I think that there's a lot of, I think that people are quite optimistic about their prospects, and they are looking at the diversification project as something that will provide work. There's still a lot of concern that they might not find the types of jobs that they want. I was recently speaking to a group of young people who were kind of on a gifted program, and they were worried that they wouldn't find jobs and that there wasn't so much competition because there are so many young people that are entering the labor market. And, you know, these are these are students that have done everything right. They're in this gifted program, an incredibly privileged gifted program, and were, you know, at one of the best universities in the kingdom doing the 6-week project, and they were still concerned. So there's definitely concerns, but I think that it's also this mentality of a zero-sum kind of eventuality, that there are only a certain number of jobs that people are going to be able to get. And I think that people do need to shift that mindset a little bit. And that goes back to kind of preparation and education in all of these programs. In terms of whether or not this is working, there was actually recently a short article that was published by Brookings Institute. And I think I mentioned some of these stats when I was presenting, but basically they were showing how basically the Temkeen participants, so people who are registered in Laman that have also then had to register for Temkeen, which is that program that, you know, makes them kind of train and actively look for work. So almost 200,000 of those who are registered since 2017 were successful. 160,000 found employment, while 35,000 started a business, and a survey of over 20,000 successful program participants indicates that the job outcomes are quite sustainable. So 2 years after initially starting a job, only 2.6% stopped working. So I think that there's definitely a trend that's in the right direction. People who are kind of going into these programs are finding meaningful work. And a lot of the new programs are also then targeting specifically upskilling. So you can get incrementally rewarded for registering for any upskilling and reskilling programs that you might need that can be up to a year long. Plus then again, the scholarship program, which is supporting education abroad for an even longer period of time. So that might have shrunk, but it was actually because they were targeting specific types of jobs and majors that they wanted to support, that were identified as key areas for economic growth in the future. So I think that it's definitely headed in the right direction.
Okay, we still have time for one more question. Any other question? So I can ask my question finally. So my question is whether there is any study that has assessed the impact of active labor market policies on women labor force participation. We know that it is an issue in the Arab region. There is low women labor force participation. I wonder if you have any idea about the impact of active labor market policies on women labor force participation. Thank you.
I'd like to pull up some stats. Actually, I should have had these ready earlier, but I think what's happened in Saudi, I mean, they've exceeded the target almost instantly in terms of trying to encourage women to enter the labor market. And I think it's really interesting because you know, for the longest time, there was this idea that there was going to be a huge resistance to women entering the labor market, despite having these policies. But some of the things that have been put into place by Human Resource Development Fund have really changed the way people view kind of the workplace. So it used to be initially when they started this, it was separating women from men completely, separate entrances, separate facilities, separate everything to get women into work. And that was very costly on employers, but it also didn't necessarily help women in building relationships that were necessary for them to continue to progress within their careers. And I think that one of the things that's happened in Saudi is then they shifted away from that and they put into place an anti-harassment law, and they put into place programs to support transportation. They allowed women then to drive, and you know, that also was primarily an active labor market policy to make sure that the women could get to work. And so I do think, and then there's also daycare support as well as subsidies. So I think that these policies have really moved the needle quite a bit. And you see that the participation, I think the target was 20% participation, and it's already over 35%, I think. So it's really grown very, very quickly. And I think that all of that had to do specifically with these policies that were put into place to encourage women to work. So there might be a resistance among certain segments of society. And I also think that there's probably targeting women who are, you know, able to work because they already probably didn't have social kind of constraints or, you know, strict gendered ideas of where women should and shouldn't work. But I think that that will trickle down. One survey I recently saw results from was talking about how women seeing other women in decision-making positions was the biggest motivator for them to get into work. So I think that that's, you know, that's really encouraging as well.
Okay. Any other question? Yes. Thank you, Adil, for your comment. So with this, thank you again, Dr. Hanaa, for answering all those questions and for the great presentation. It was a pleasure to have you with us. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.